Moazzam Begg is a British Pakistani who was held in extrajudicial detention by the U.S. government in the Bagram Theater Internment Facility in the Guantanamo Bay detainment camp, in Cuba, for nearly 3 years after being arrested in Pakistan in February 2002. Arrested by Pakistani police at his home, he was transferred to the custody of U.S. Army officers, who took him first to their detention center at Bagram, Afghanistan. The Pentagon claimed Begg was an enemy combatant and al-Qaeda member, who recruited for al-Qaeda, provided money for their training camps, and trained at their camps in Afghanistan to fight U.S. or Allied troops. Begg has said he spent time at 2 Islamic training camps in Afghanistan, supported militant Muslim fighters, bought a rifle and a handgun, and was acquainted with persons linked to terrorism, but he denies the remainder of the U.S.'s allegations. Begg says that when he was incarcerated at Bagram, he was abused, which the Pentagon denies. He stated that he witnessed 2 detainees being beaten to death while detained at Bagram. After an investigation, in 2005 United States officials concluded the detainees were murdered by American soldiers. The UK government intervened on behalf of his citizens detained at Guantanamo. Most were released in 2004. President George W. Bush had Begg released without charge on January 25, 2005. The Pentagon, CIA, and FBI objected, stating there was a possibility that Begg was a terrorist. Begg and other British citizens who had been detained at Guantanamo sued the British government for complicity in their alleged abuse and torture while in the custody of the United States. In November 2010, the British government announced that it had reached an out-of-court financial settlement with several men, including Begg. After his release, Begg became a commentator on radio and television on issues pertaining to the UK Muslim community, and UK and worldwide anti-terror measures. He toured as a speaker, lecturing about his time in Guantanamo and other detention facilities. Referring to the war in Afghanistan, he said he completely supported the inalienable right of the people to fight foreign occupation. Begg co-authored a book, and has written newspaper and magazine articles. In 2010, Geeta Sahgal, then the head of Amnesty International's gender unit, publicly criticized her organization for its association with Begg, who was speaking about Guantanamo and trying to persuade nations to accept released detainees who could not return to their countries of origin. She said the association was a gross error of judgment. She was suspended and later resigned. On February 25, 2014, Begg was arrested by the West Midlands Police on suspicion of attending a terrorist training camp and facilitating terrorism overseas. West Midlands Police said, "This is an arrest, not a charge, and our naming does not imply any guilt." On March 1, 2014, Begg was charged with providing terrorist training and funding terrorism overseas, regarding Syria, and appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court, entering a plea of not guilty. He appeared along with a woman, Jerry Tahari, 44, from Sparkbrook, Birmingham, also accused of funding terrorism overseas. He was scheduled for a plea hearing on July 14, 2014, provisionally followed by a trial at the Old Bailey on October 6, 2014. On October 1, 2014, it was announced that the 7 Syria-related terror charges against him had been dropped, and that he would be released from HMP Belmarsh the same day. In the coverage of his release, a CPS spokesperson stated, "If we had been made aware of all of this information at the time of charging, we would not have charged." Early life and education. Childhood. Begg, born in England to Malaysian Muslim parents who immigrated to the UK, holds dual UK-Euro-Indian citizenship. He was born in Sparkhill, a suburb of Birmingham, and his mother died when he was 6. His father, Asmat Begg, a former bank manager, was born in British India and lived in Pakistan before emigrating to Great Britain. Begg grew up in Moseley. His father sent him to the Jewish King David School, Birmingham, from age 5 to 11, because he thought it promoted good values. Begg later attended Moseley Secondary School. During high school, he became a member of the Lynx Gang, a Birmingham street gang. The group was mostly Pakistani, but also included Algerians, Asians, Afro-Caribbeans and Irish people. they banded together to fight persecution by far-right anti-immigrant groups. He said we did things that no good Muslim should, but stated he rarely did anything violent. He appeared in court for taking part in a fight with skinheads. Begg attended Solihull College and University of Wolverhampton. UK, Afghanistan, Bosnia, 1993 Euro 98 On a family holiday to Saudi Arabia and Pakistan in his late teens, Begg became interested in Islam. In late 1993 he returned to Pakistan, and crossed the Pakistani-Euro-Afghan border with the leader of the Lynx gang, Syed Moazzam Begg, and some fellow young Pakistanis near the city of Khost. Begg said he met with nationalist and Islamic rebels and spent 2 weeks in a training camp run by either the anti-Taliban Northern Alliance or a Pakistani group fighting for Kashmir. People were being trained to use Kalashnikovs and handguns, and in mountain tactics and guerrilla methods. Begg later wrote of his time at the training camp, "I had met men who seemed to me exemplary in their faith and self-sacrifice, and seen a world that awed and inspired me." Begg says he did not participate in the training. Inspired by the commitment of the Mujahideen, he states he later traveled to Bosnia in the early 1990s to help the Muslims during its civil war. He said he was terribly affected by some of the stories of the atrocities taking place there, and supported militant Muslims. In 1994 he joined a charity that worked with Muslims in Bosnia. He states he very briefly joined the Bosnian Army Foreign Volunteer Force. He said, "In Bosnia, I did fight for a while. But I saw people horribly damaged, and I thought, this is not for me." Begg first met Khalil Deek in Bosnia. Begg also tried to travel to Chechnya during its struggle with Russia. While he thought that fighting wasn't out of the question, he states he did not participate in the armed struggle. He gave financial support to the Muslim fighters. Begg was arrested in 1994 charged with conspiracy to defraud the Department of Social Security. His friend and fellow Lynx gang member Syed Moazzam Begg was also charged, pleaded guilty, and served 18 months in jail. The fraud charges against Begg were subsequently dropped. A search of his home by anti-terrorist police reportedly found night vision goggles, a bulletproof vest, and extremist Islamic literature. Other items included a flak jacket for protection against shrapnel from mines in Bosnia, and a handheld night vision lens, to help navigate Bosnian streets that lacked electricity. He denied owning any extremist Islamic literature, and noted the items seized were no different from what many aid workers operating in conflict zones might carry. His father said Begg had been collecting military paraphernalia as a hobby since childhood. In 1999, but began a 5-year prison sentence in Yemen for planning a terrorist bombing. In 2005, after Begg's detention at Guantanamo became public knowledge, the U.S. Justice Department alleged he had received extensive training in al-Qaeda terrorist camps since 1993. Pentagon officials said that Begg trained at 3 terrorist camps associated with al-Qaeda. While at the training camps, he reportedly trained to use handguns, AK-47 rifles, and RPGs and to plan ambushes. The statement identified Begg as a member of al-Qaeda and affiliated organizations who was a engaged in hostilities against the United States and its coalition partner in Afghanistan, and said he provided support to al-Qaeda terrorists, by providing shelter for their families while the al-Qaeda terrorists committed terrorist acts. Marriage and moved to Pakistan. In 1995 Begg married. He and his family moved to Peshawar, Pakistan in early 1998. Khalil Deek also lived in Peshawar at that time. The U.S. 9/11 Commission later described him as an associate of Abu Zubaydah, believed then to be a senior al-Qaeda lieutenant, who they said was in Peshawar to recruit men to train at Afghan camps. The CIA and MI5 suspected Begg worked with Deek to create a CD-ROM terrorist manual. Begg said in an interview that he met Deek in Bosnia and went in together with him on a business deal, but said he never met Zubaydah. Pentagon officials said that conflicts with what he told interrogators. Begg notes that he visited a second Afghan training camp, near Jalalabad, for 2 or 3 days during that time. He states it was run by Iraqi Kurds, not by al-Qaeda. They were training to use improvised incendiary grenades to fight Saddam Hussein. He donated a few hundred British pounds to that camp and a third training camp. A Pentagon spokesman said Begg spent 5 days in early 1998 at Duranta, an al-Qaeda-affiliated Afghan training camp. Defense Department officials said that Begg's sworn statements state he trained at Duranta and 2 other Afghan camps. He denied saying that, but acknowledged signing some documents while in custody because he feared for his life. Guantanamo files leaked in 2011 reveal that the Department of Defense had secretly concluded that Begg was a confirmed member of al-Qaeda, and that he had been an instructor at the Duranta training camp, as well as having attended the al-Badr and Harakat-e-Ansar training camps. UK, 1998 to 2001, arrest and raids Begg returned to Birmingham in 1998, opening an Islamic book and video store. The Maktab al-Ansar bookshop in Sparkhill, Birmingham, became a gathering place. Some of the patrons were on British and US government watch lists. MI5 first raided it the following year. A former employee of the bookshop and co-worker of Begg, identified only as D, was an Algerian illegal immigrant who was placed under a control order on December 18, 2001. D had previously been convicted in France for membership in the terrorist organization group Islamic Copyright, and was alleged to have been in contact with numerous individuals convicted of terrorist offenses, including Jamal Bal, Brahim Bemzga, Baghdad Metzian, and Abu Qaeda. In 1999, Begg through his bookstore commissioned and published a book by Diran Barot about his experiences in Kashmir, entitled The Army of Madinah in Kashmir. Barot had undergone training in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and joined the insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir against India. He was later referred to as Bin Laden's UK general, convicted in Britain of being an al-Qaeda terrorist, and sentenced to 40 years in jail. Barot wrote the book under the alias Isa el-Hindi. Barot wrote in the book, "Terror works, and that is why the believers are commanded to enforce it by Allah." The book was used as evidence against Barot at his trial for planning a dirty bomb attack on London, in which he was convicted. In February 2000, dozens of Special Branch and MI5 officers investigating Islamic terrorism raided the bookshop, took away books, files, and computers, questioned staff, and arrested Begg under British anti-terrorism laws. They found the bookstore offered titles such as The Virtues of Jihad and Declaration of War. Begg was released without charge. Begg's father said the British government retrieved encrypted files from his son's computer, and ordered Begg to open them, but Begg refused. A judge ruled in Begg's favour. Ruhul Ahmed was later a fellow Guantanamo detainee, one of the so-called Tipton Three, young men from the same town in Britain. While incarcerated, he is alleged to have told investigators that he had first become interested in jihad in summer 2000 after purchasing numerous books on jihad from the Maktab al-Ansar bookshop. Begg's home in the UK was raided by anti-terrorist police in the summer of 2001. They took his computer and some related materials, but did not press charges. Afghanistan, Pakistan, July 2001 February 2002, arrest. With his wife Zainab and 3 young children, Begg moved to Kabul, Afghanistan, in late July 2001. At the time, the Taliban ruled Afghanistan. Begg saw it as a low-cost place to raise a family, and a place where his wife and children would not be harassed for their race. He wrote in his autobiography that by 2001 the Taliban had made some modest progress in social justice and upholding pure, old Islamic values forgotten in many Islamic countries. Begg has since criticized the Taliban for its human rights abuses. He says that he moved to Kabul because he was moved by the plight of the Afghan people living under the Taliban regime and to fulfill his dream of being a teacher. Begg says while still in the UK, he had begun sponsoring a school for basic education, providing books, teaching materials, and classroom and playground equipment. He says he was in the process of starting the school, and was going to be a charity worker at it. He intended it to teach both boys and girls, although the Taliban regime opposed education for females and had not given him a license. Begg states he also intended to build wells. In his book Enemy Combatant, Begg recalls telling two U.S. agents who visited him in his Guantanamo Bay cell that, "I wanted to live in an Islamic state, one that was free from the corruption and despotism of the rest of the Muslim world. I knew you wouldn't understand. The Taliban were better than anything Afghanistan has had in the past 25 years. The Allied attack on Afghanistan began in October 2001, and following the Taliban's defeat, a U.S. Justice Department dossier on Begg indicates that he joined their retreat to the Tora Bora Mountains. The Pentagon asserts that he was prepared to fight in the front line against Allied forces while in Afghanistan. He bought a rifle and handgun. He said that he and his family evacuated to Islamabad in Pakistan for safety. He became separated from his family for 3 weeks. He and several other men were guided over the mountains in western Pakistan, and he reunited with his family by mid-November. Al-Qaeda's Duranta training camp, 15 miles from Jalalabad, was captured in November 2001. In the camp were found al-Qaeda training books, sketches of bombs, bomb-building manuals, lists of potential targets, and a photocopy of a wire transfer moving funds from the Habib Bank AG Zurich to Moazzam Begg in Karachi. U.S. and Pakistani officials did not yet know who Begg was. Begg maintains that he is unaware of such a transaction, and that no one has shown him the document. In February 2002, Begg was arrested at his rented home in Islamabad, by Pakistani police officers on suspicion of links with the Taliban or al-Qaeda. His family maintains it was a case of mistaken identity. After several weeks, the Pakistanis transferred him over to United States Army officers. He was taken back to Kabul by car. Detention in Afghanistan. Begg was held at Bagram Theater Internment Facility for approximately a year, from February 2002 to February 2003. He states he was tortured at Bagram, hog-tied, kicked, punched, left in a room with a bag put over his head, sworn at, and threatened with extraordinary rendition to Egypt. Pentagon spokesman Brian Whitman said at the time, there was no credible evidence that Begg was ever abused by U.S. forces, and U.S. intelligence officials insisted Begg exaggerated the harshness of his treatment. The Department of Defense conducted 3 investigations, and found no evidence to substantiate his claims. In a July 2004 letter, Begg wrote of threats of torture, actual torture, death threats, racial and religious abuse, cruel and unusual treatment, and that documents were signed under duress. He also wrote, "This culminated, in my opinion, with the deaths of 2 fellow detainees, at the hands of U.S. military personnel, to which I myself was partially witness." Begg stated that while at Bagram, he saw 2 other detainees being beaten so badly that he believed the beatings caused their deaths. At the time DoD denied his account. In an investigation whose results were reported in May 2005, the Department of Defense confirmed Begg's account of the deaths of 2 Afghan detainees, and said they had been murdered via mistreatment by American soldiers. Detention in Guantanamo Bay. Conditions and purported admissions. Begg was transferred on February 2, 2003 to United States military custody at Guantanamo Bay Detention Camp. In a February 2003 editorial in Gulf News, Linda Hurd reported that Begg had told his parents in a letter that he did not know what he was accused of and was beginning to feel hopeless and depressed. He later confessed to being part of a plot to spray the Palace of Westminster with anthrax, a plan which seemed to security experts to be beyond his level of expertise. Begg was held in Guantanamo Bay for just under 2 years, often in solitary confinement. The U.S. government considered Begg an enemy combatant, and claimed that he trained at al-Qaeda terrorist camps in Afghanistan. He was not charged with any crime and reportedly was not allowed to consult legal counsel for the majority of the time he spent there. An October 9, 2003 memo summarizing a meeting between General Jeffrey Miller and his staff and Vincent Cassad of the International Committee of the Red Cross said that camp authorities did not permit them to have access to Begg, due to military necessity, an exception allowed by the Geneva Conventions. In a July 2004 letter, Begg said he was not tortured in Guantanamo. though the conditions were torturous. Late in 2004, Clive Stafford Smith visited Begg and said he heard credible and consistent evidence from Begg of torture, including the use of stropedo. The Pentagon maintains that torture was prohibited at Guantanamo Bay, that all credible allegations of abuse are investigated, and that the United States operates a safe, humane and professional detention operation at Guantanamo that is providing valuable information on the war on terrorism. Begg's American lawyer, Gitanjali Gutierrez of the Center for Constitutional Rights, received a handwritten letter from him, dated July 12, 2004, addressed to the U.S. Forces Administration at Guantanamo Bay. It was copied to Begg's lawyers and the U.S. authorities agreed to declassify it. Its full text was passed to his British lawyer, Gareth Park. He insisted, "I am a law-abiding citizen of the UK, and attest vehemently to my innocence, before God and the law, of any crime though none has even been alleged." Known and suspected contacts with extremists and suspected extremists equals. Release, following the United States Supreme Court decision in Razel v. Bush, in which the court ruled that detainees had habeas corpus rights and could challenge their detention, the U.S. government quickly developed a system of combatant status review tribunals, administrative review boards, and military commissions to provide the detainees with an impartial tribunal for reviewing their cases. Detainees could not call counsel, could not review the evidence against them, and had allegations made that were dependent on hearsay evidence. The British government protested subjecting their citizens to the planned Guantanamo tribunals, because due process rights were severely curtailed. On January 11, 2005, the British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw announced that, after intensive and complex discussions between his government and the U.S., the remaining 4 British nationals in Guantanamo Bay would be returned within weeks. While they were still regarded as enemy combatants by the U.S. government, it had brought no specific charges against them. Bush released Begg as a favor to Prime Minister Tony Blair, reported the New York Times and CNN. On January 25, 2005, Begg and the 3 other British citizen detainees were flown to RAF Northolt in West London. On arrival they were arrested under the Terrorism Act 2000 by officers from the Metropolitan Police and taken to Paddington Green Police Station for questioning by anti-terrorist officers. By 9 p.m. on January 26, all 4 had been released without charge. Post-release, January 2005 present. U.S. assertions of Begg's ties to terrorism Bush released Begg over the objections of the Pentagon, the CIA, and the FBI, overruling most of his senior national security advisors, who were concerned that Begg could be a dangerous terrorist. In 2006, the Pentagon still maintained that he was a terrorist. After Begg's release, Brian Whitman, a Defense Department spokesman, described Begg as follows: "He has strong, long-term ties to terrorism as a sympathizer, as a recruiter, as a financier and as a combatant." Whitman added, quoting from a single-spaced 8-page confession that Begg made while incarcerated, that Begg said, "I was armed and prepared to fight alongside the Taliban and al-Qaeda against the U.S. and others, and eventually retreated to Tora Bora to flee from U.S. forces when our front lines collapsed. I knowingly provided comfort and assistance to al-Qaeda members by housing their families, helped distribute al-Qaeda propaganda, and received members from terrorist camps knowing that certain trainees could become al-Qaeda operatives and commit acts of terrorism against the United States." Begg maintains the confession is false, and that he gave it while under duress. Evidence gained under torture or coercion is not considered admissible in a court of law. Whitman said Begg was trying to recant his confession, and U.S. intelligence officials maintain that Begg's statement is accurate. The Department of Justice's Office of the Inspector General investigated Begg's claim that the FBI forced him to sign his confession. The OIG concluded that the evidence did not support the allegation that FBI agents coerced Begg into signing the statement. Former military interrogator Christopher Hogan said, "He provided us with excellent information routinely. I don't think he was the mastermind of 9/11, but nor do I think he was just an innocent." The New York Times reported in June 2006, Of nearly 20 American military and intelligence officials who were interviewed about Begg, none thought he had been wrongly detained. But some said they doubted that he could be tied to any terrorist acts. In February 2005, British Home Secretary Charles Clarke refused to issue Begg a passport. He did so based on information obtained while Begg was in U.S. custody. He said there are strong grounds for believing that, on leaving the UK, Begg would take part in activities against the United Kingdom or Allied targets. In July 2014, Begg was charged with terrorist activities related to his actions in the Syrian civil war, including attending a terrorist training camp. In October 2014, all charges against him were dropped. According to The Guardian, the case against Begg was dropped after documents were disclosed before the trial showing that MI5 had been aware of and consented to his travels to Syria, partly as his car had been bugged for a year by MI5. Public positions. Since his release, Begg has stated he is against attacks such as 9/11 and that he supported those fighting against British soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. He founded the non-profit organization and advocacy group Caja Prisoners, to represent those detainees still held at Guantanamo, as well as help those who have been released to get services and integrate into society. He has traveled on speaking tours, and worked with governments of countries to persuade them to accept former detainees for resettlement. Following the 2014 Peshawar school massacre, in which over 130 pupils and teachers were killed by the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, Begg wrote a comment on Facebook which was reported in his hometown's main newspaper, the Birmingham Post. Begg stated that it is time to stop this cycle of uncontrolled rage and internecine violence that will only drive us to the pits of hell. Incessant calls for revenge each time need to be tempered with reflections on the consequences of what that means. There are no winners in this. Alleged contacts with extremists after release. Umar Farouk Abu-Muttalib was the president of the Islamic Society at University College London in 2007, when Begg gave a number of presentations. The Times reported that Begg took part in the War on Terror Week UCL presentations at Abu-Muttalib's invitation. The New York Times reported that Abu-Muttalib helped organize the week as president of the college's Islamic Society. Fabian de Fabiani, a student who attended, said Abu-Muttalib was seated, where the lecturer would usually sit, very close, to Begg. The Daily Mail reported that a poster for the event, featuring Begg's lecture, bore the name Umar Farouk. Begg said that he does not recall Abu-Muttalib, and that he was told that the War on Terror Week unregistered trademark UCL presentations were organized by Qasim Rafiq, a friend of Abu-Muttalib unregistered trademark S. He was told Abu-Muttalib did not attend any of the lectures. 3 other presidents of the society in the UK were either been convicted of or arrested for terrorism activity in the year prior to Abu-Muttalib's arrest. Begg interviewed the al-Qaeda leader Anwar al-Awlaki, a former imam in the United States, after the latter was released from jail in Yemen in 2007. Al-Awlaki was invited to address Caja Prisoners' Ramadan fundraising dinners in August 2008 at Wandsworth Civic Centre, South London, and August 2009 at Kensington Town Hall. The local authority told the group it could not broadcast al-Awlaki's words on its property. Caja Prisoners has material about and by al-Awlaki on its website. Video. After his release, Begg appeared in the video 21st Century Crusaders, saying that the war on terrorism is really akin to a war against Islam. The British government considers possession of this film to indicate possible radicalization. Book, 2006. Begg co-authored a book released in March 2006 about his Guantanamo experiences. It was published in Britain as Enemy Combatant, A British Muslim's Journey to Guantanamo and Back, and in the US as Enemy Combatant, My Imprisonment at Guantanamo, Bagram, and Kandahar. It was co-written with Victoria Britton, a former associate foreign editor of The Guardian. The book followed a play that the two co-wrote, entitled Guantanamo, Honor Bound to Defend Freedom, which played in London, New York, and Washington, D.C. The book received mixed reviews. Publishers Weekly described it as a fast-paced, harrowing narrative. Much of the Moazzam Begg story is consistent with other accounts of detention conditions in both Afghanistan and Guantanamo, said John Sifton, a New York-based official from Human Rights Watch, who interviewed former Guantanamo prisoners in Pakistan and Afghanistan. The Muslim News called it an open, honest and touching account. Begg was named Best British Author for the book at the annual Muslim Writers' Awards in March 2008. The New York Times reported some notable gaps in Mr. Begg's memoir, in that he did not mention his previous arrest. UT San Diego said, Begg has been less than forthcoming about his criminal past, his cooperation with interrogators, and his ties to terrorism. Jonathan Raban, reviewing it for the New York Review of Books, wrote, "One has the sense of reading not a memoir but a raw copyright summa copyright. Like most raw copyright summa copyright-s, it feels airbrushed. It is a strategic biography." Begg's travels, during the time the U.S. maintains he was with the Taliban, get confusing, and plotting them on an atlas only adds to the reader's puzzlement. The gaps in his story are and they are more frustrating than downright suspicious cease at the moment when Begg enters captivity. Enemy Combatant has been praised in Britain for Begg's outstanding liberality of mind and even-handedness towards his captors. Unfortunately, these relationships are rendered in long passages of direct speech, and Begg and or his co-author are notably talentless at writing dialogue. Perhaps Begg really did strike up a warm relationship with soldier Jennifer, but all one can say of the words on the page is that they are resoundingly phony. Only in bad fiction do people speak this way, and true though Begg's story may well be in its essential facts, it is very poorly served by line after line of rankly implausible writing. Lawsuit against the British government. In April 2008, Begg and other former Guantanamo detainees filed lawsuits at Britain's High Court against the British Attorney General, Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary Michigan 5, and MI6, accusing them of unlawful acts, negligence, and conspiracy in their abduction, treatment, and interrogation, and seeking millions of dollars in damages. The government denied the charges, but stated that MI5 had interviewed some detainees and in some instances supplied questions that they wished the prisoners to be asked. The Security Service undertook this role because, as the UK agency with the most experience of running intelligence-led counter-terrorist investigations in the UK, it was best placed to understand and utilise the information received about threats against the UK, or involving British nationals. In November 2010, the British government announced that it had reached a financial settlement with a number of individuals, including Begg. The British government said there was no evidence that British officials participated directly in the abuse of prisoners. However, a public inquiry was conducted to determine the matter. Similar suits have been filed against the governments of Canada and Australia by former citizen detainees who returned to those countries. Canada settled with May Herrera in January 2007. Guantanamo video game, 2009 . In 2009 Begg was a technical advisor, and was slated to appear as himself, for the Scottish software company T Enterprise in the development of a video game entitled Rendition, Guantanamo, for Microsoft's Xbox 360. The game would have put the player in the place of the detainees. Begg was to do 3 days of sound with the company, and then be 3D rendered into the game. Begg had a financial stake in the game. He said, "This game will not demean the reality of Guantanamo, but will help to bring those issues to people who would not usually think about it." T Enterprise hoped to earn £3 million on its £250,000 investment, targeting the Middle East market. Conservative pundits such as the Weekly Standard Euro's Tom Joslin and radio host Rush Limbaugh reacted negatively to the game and Begg's involvement. The company received numerous complaints via email about the game. T Enterprise did not complete the game due to U.S. press coverage, which it described as inaccurate and ill-informed speculation. Many conclusions were reached that have absolutely no foundation whatsoever. Speaker and activist. As director for the prisoner rights organization, Cadre Prisoners, Begg has appeared in the media and around the country, lecturing on issues pertaining to the UK Muslim community, such as imprisonment without trial, torture, anti-terror legislation and measures, and community relations. He has appeared as a commentator on radio and television interviews and documentaries, including the BBC's Panorama and News Night shows, PBS's The Prisoner, Al Jazeera's Prisoner 345, Taking Liberties, and Torturing Democracy, and National Geographic's Guantanamo's Secrets. He has authored pieces which have appeared in newspapers and magazines. He has toured as a speaker about his time in detention facilities, calling the British response to terrorism as racist and disproportionate to anti-terror measures and legislation during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. In January 2009, Begg toured the UK with former Guantanamo guard Christopher Arendt, in the Two Sides, One Story tour. Begg campaigned against U.S. wartime policy with human rights organizations such as Reprieve, Amnesty International, the Center for Constitutional Rights, Peacemaker, and Conflicts Forum. Appeal to Iraqi Kidnappers, 2005. On December 9, 2005, Begg made a video appeal to the Swords of Righteousness Brigade, the Iraqi kidnappers of 4 Christian peace workers. Begg said seeing the peace workers in orange boiler suits reminded him of his own incarceration in Guantanamo Bay. 1 hostage was killed, and the remaining 3 were freed in a military operation. Amnesty International Controversy, 2010. In 2010, Geeta Sahgal, then head of Amnesty's Gender Unit, publicly condemned her organization for its collaboration with Begg because of his association with CAD prisoners, which undertook the Counter-Terror with Justice campaign, which she says constitutes a threat to human rights. In a letter to Amnesty's leadership, she said, to be appearing on platforms with Britain's most famous supporter of the Taliban, whom we treat as a human rights defender, is a gross error of judgment. Begg filed a complaint with the Press Complaints Commission and notified his attorney to pursue legal action against the Sunday Times. Amnesty International posted a response by Whitney Brown, Senior Director for International Law and Policy, on its blog Livewire. Salman Rushdie was quoted as stating, "Amnesty has done its reputation incalculable damage by allying itself with Moazzam Begg and his group CAD prisoners, and holding them up as human rights advocates. Amnesty and Begg have revealed, by their statements and actions, that they deserve our contempt." Some British politicians and journalists strongly criticised Amnesty's endorsement of Begg. See also, Andy Worthington, Babar Ahmad, Third Geneva Convention. References. External links, interview with Moazzam Begg, CADprisoners.com, March 6, 2006. The Prisoner, PBS, week of July 28, 2006, a conversation about detention, torture, and civil liberties, via videoconference from the UK. With Moazzam Begg, Bill of Rights Defence Committee website, November 12, 2006. Moazzam Begg responds to his critics, andyworthington.co. February 21, 2010. Moazzam Begg, the ex-Gitmo prisoner now doing the United States work, The Atlantic, November 30, 2010. Access June 22, 2014. WikiLeaks, Guantanamo Files on Moazzam Begg, Maktab al-Ansar Bookshop at the Wayback Machine, Julian Assange interviews Moazzam Begg plus Asim Qureshi of Cage.